I know I need to talk about this one because it is my lived experience. I have eating disorders and I do CrossFit. A podcast came out suggesting that CrossFit causes orthorexia. Zac Telander was on it, and also Aaron from the Align podcast. I'm more familiar with him actually. I followed him on Instagram for years. They both had some very interesting points, and then Wykie and Nate both commented on it as well from the CrossFit space, and they both had really good points. One thing that really shocked me is that Nate hadn't heard of orthorexia,
where they were discussing this thing called orthorexia. I had not heard of it before.
This just proves to me that we need more awareness around eating disorders within sports because they are so common. He had some personal experiences to share and they're very similar to mine.
But I think I had it. I really do.
This is a clear sign that something needs to change within the CrossFit space. The eating disorder I'm diagnosed with is bulimia, and I've also got body dysmorphia. During my peak of being unwell and super lean at the same time, I had a lot of the symptoms of orthorexia, but often they don't really diagnose you with any other eating disorder after you've already got one because they're all very similar.
I legitimately didn't take a rest day for like 5 or 6 months in a row.
Nate talks about this mindset of having no rest days at all, to the point where he was forced to take a couple of weeks off because he got so sick from not taking rest days.
Like, I worked myself into the ground. I started tracking macros. I became obsessed with it. I started mentally punishing myself for eating bad food.
Obsessively tracking macros, obsessively overtraining, and this is also the headspace that I was in. Cutting out food groups, demonizing certain types of food, and having this all or nothing mentality at the expense of your body and your health.
Even still to this day, like, there are certain things that stick with me in my brain about like consuming sugar and like eating junk food and all these things, and I have these negative thought loops every once in a while where it's like, you shouldn't be doing this, like this is bad for you.
And similarly to Nate, I had like this crash where I'd been literally training 7 days a week, double days some days, and then I was wiped out for just over a week, and I thought I had adrenal fatigue. Obviously it was just that I hadn't rested. But my problem was I thought I was doing a good thing because I was acting on the advice from CrossFit. I'll get into that specific piece of advice that I took too far in a bit, but I wanted to touch on this.
Like, I have this story that if I'm not the strongest person or the fastest person or the most whatever thing, then that hits on parts of me where I'm like, I don't feel good.
That this particular problem that Aaron had with CrossFit is more of a him problem than a CrossFit problem.
I'm gonna just butcher this movement in order to get more weight, and I'm actually going to have a mechanical breakdown in order to fulfill my ego.
There's a lot of people that come into the gym with a big ego and they want to do well, and it makes them really sad when they're not the fittest and strongest in the class. And whatever compromises they make with their technique or what weights they're lifting, etc., in order to beat other people, that is a them problem. But on the other side of that, a lot of CrossFit gyms massively encourage competing with each other, and they'll rank you on the whiteboard. Some gyms don't, some gyms make it mandatory. There was one particular gym that I went to last year that they would have you call your scores out in front of the rest of the class, and that felt like they were really pitting members against each other. And on some of the workouts I was like, whoa, I'm not training to go as fast as I possibly can, I'm trying to work on my pull-ups in this one, and I don't mind if I'm a little bit slower because I'm focusing on my technique and trying to get better rather than trying to be faster. And that is a problem with individual gyms. It absolutely should not be mandatory to have your score compared to other people, but generally within CrossFit it's pretty good and they don't do that. If we are dealing with issues to do with self-comparison, that is a personal issue that could be dealt with, but it would be really nice if CrossFit started to approach this topic as well and recognise that competition for the everyday person that's just trying to get fitter maybe isn't always the best thing, and some people just want to get fit and healthy. The really problematic thing that CrossFit continually puts out is the fitness in 100 words, and it says little starch, no sugar, which is demonising sugar as a whole and saying you should never eat it, which is crazy because sugar is in a lot of different things. And they definitely demonise like starchy carbohydrates, sugar, any kind of processed food, and that is one of the things that led to my eating disorder kind of spiralling out of control again. CrossFit wasn't entirely to blame, but it was definitely part of it. And I remember in the gym that I was in at the time, they had some posters on the wall with a big red cross through carbohydrates, and that led me to be terrified of like bread and rice and any kind of like packaged food. And for me, because I had bulimia, that would often be followed with this guilt and shame if I ever did eat like a piece of cake at someone's birthday, and then I would obviously like purge and go down that whole spiral. This post came out just this week, which is from the CrossFit book, which I believe is the book that Greg Glassman is writing, and he's changed it to some starch, little fruit, no sugar. So he's basically further demonizing fruit now, and he says this is the biggest modification we've made to CrossFit nutrition. Honestly, this isn't nutrition advice, it's just a sentence, and it is absolute bollocks. Fruit is good for you, and if you get nutrition guidance from a dietitian, from a health professional, from the NHS, from people that are actually qualified in the field, they will tell you that fruit is still good for you and isn't to be demonized. And this is part of the problem of the fitness industry coming up with their own nutritional ideas that are not based in fact or science. What was accurate is still accurate. Everything is okay in moderation. Having like the healthy plate model is always a good idea, with lots of veggies, some carbohydrates for energy, enough protein, and fats for hormone health. I would massively recommend going onto Abby Sharp's YouTube channel for some more recommendations around food. She is a qualified dietitian and she knows her stuff. I found this Morning Chalk Up article really interesting, and it's basically suggesting that these guidelines need to shift, and they probably will shift over time as the sport evolves and as athletes realise that they know what they need to eat to fuel themselves. This article acknowledges that it's really hard to eat completely unprocessed foods, and it is a restrictive mindset and not actually really that healthy to ban yourself from eating certain things. But she's also saying that ultra processed foods aren't that great for you, but it's definitely a more balanced view than we've seen from CrossFit over the years. CrossFit also says that what you eat shouldn't support levels of body fat, and when I read that first, I took that completely literally. I thought that meant I shouldn't have any body fat. And for women, body fat is essential for hormone production, and if you don't have enough body fat and your cycle stops, that can lead to infertility, lack of bone density and joint problems, and loads of other issues. It's really hard to decipher what exactly is a processed food, like how far do you take it? If you're going to demonize bread because it contains flour, which is processed, are you also going to demonize like oats because they're milled? And what about oat milk that loads of fitness influencers drink religiously? What about like cooking and curing meats? Those are both processes. Peanut butter is obviously processed. There's loads of different types of spreads that are processed. Butter itself is processed. Canned tuna, canned anything could be considered processed. And then we've got to acknowledge the highly privileged mindset that comes with banning processed foods out of your diet. Processed foods tend to be a lot cheaper, more accessible, and they store for a lot longer. Nutrition advice that would be better would be to get more vegetables into their diet, whether that comes from like chopped, pre-prepped frozen vegetables, tinned vegetables, ready meal vegetables, or fresh vegetables. Any is fine, and if you're doing that frequently and getting more veg into your diet, it's going to have a better, healthier overview than not including them. Another classic example of why processed foods aren't bad is Matt Fraser.
Like very calorically dense food, a lot of carbs.
While I was recovering, I was following Feeding the Frasers, and I was seeing all of the meals that Sammy was making for Matt and realising that the fittest man on earth at the time ate carbohydrates, and that meant it couldn't be bad. And not only did he eat carbohydrates, he ate like cinnamon buns and pancakes and processed carbohydrates and things with sugar in them.
Mini wheats, bite size only. What type of chicken tenders are those? Tyson?
Yeah.
Tyson extra crispy or something?
Something like that.
We could also look at someone like Dani Speegle, who very openly loves cookies, and she is ridiculously strong. Personally, I'm more inclined to believe the nutrition advice of athletes that also have nutrition qualifications and know what they're talking about, rather than some blanket statement that came from Greg Glassman like 10 years ago. I feel like that is quite outdated, and that statement, if CrossFit continues to cling to it, will continue to cause problematic relationships with food with the members of their CrossFit gyms. I don't believe that CrossFit itself causes orthorexia, but I do think something needs to change. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of people out there trying to tell you that a lot of this food is like toxic, and there definitely needs to be more awareness on how much damage that could be causing. Quite frankly, we need to update that fitness in 100 words and make it more sustainable and balanced with an awareness that eating disorders exist. Thankfully, there are a few athletes leading the way, and Dani Speegle is one of the people that is really showing women that they need to eat in order to get stronger and fitter and better at the sport. Dani is changing CrossFit for the women of the future. If you're interested to hear more about that, watch this video right here next. Thank you for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!